In the year of 1986, Frank Miller published the historic and revolutionary comic The Dark Knight Returns. In this story, a 50-year-old Bruce Wayne comes out of retirement to fight once again against the rising crime in Gotham City. This last crusade leads him to face his greatest challenges, from Two-Face, the Mutant Gang, and the Joker, to culminating in his fight against the status quo of the United States and finally against his greatest adversary. I am of course referring to Superman. And it is that this battle between the two titans of comics has that historical impact, since it has a deeper ideological meaning than what can be appreciated at first glance. That's why in this video we will analyze the hidden meaning of Frank Miller's Batman vs Superman fight. Story of The Dark Knight Returns. Analyzing the layer that is closest to the surface to discover why this comic is so historic. Let's get started. Layer number 1. The first real battle between the two titans. The Dark Knight Returns was not the first occasion where Superman and Batman exchanged blows. They are likely the two most important superheroes of our culture, and since both characters are part of DC Comics, they have many years of history together. The first time the company decided to bring together its two biggest characters was on the cover of World's Fair Comics, a collectible comic that was sold during the New York World's Fair in the year 1940. However, even though they are both on the same cover, inside the comic, their stories were separate. After the fair, this comic format continued under the title World's Finest Comics. This comic presented you with separate stories of Superman and Batman in which they occasionally met and also occasionally fought. However, these occasional fights between them always occurred under abnormal circumstances. On some occasions, Superman had lost his powers. On others, both were forced to fight. On others, Batman acquired powers. Someone was mentally controlled, they were manipulated, etc. Also, let's not forget that the stories of this era were much more innocent, and in the end, they always returned to being friends. The Dark Knight Returns changed all of this, as it was the first story in which both characters faced each other in a real and completely serious context, each bringing all their skills to the fight. The fight in this sense represented the end of an era, the end of the Super Friends, and marked a symbolic closure to all those cheerful stories from the Silver Age of comics in which both smoothed things over after a couple of words. Now, since we saw why this fight was something so historic in the comic medium, it's time to go a layer deeper, as this fight also symbolizes the struggle between two political ideologies. Layer number 2. Anarchism versus Conservatism. Frank Miller's Batman vs Superman fight goes beyond fists and kryptonite arrows, as each of the characters represents a transcendental political ideology for the time when this comic was written. To understand this well, we have to remember that this comic was written in the mid-80s, in a world that was still living under the tension of the Cold War and the fear of World War III, which came close to happening several times. Let's remember that the Cold War was not a physical war as such, but an unarmed conflict that began at the end of World War II, in which the two most powerful powers in the world, that is the United States and the Soviet Union, were fighting to see who had the biggest army and weaponry. It was really an ideological war in which both competed to see which political system had more influence in the world and in smaller countries. This can be seen directly in this comic in the Civil War of Corto Maltese. While the Soviet Union supported the rebels, the United States supported the government. They supported it so much that they sent Superman to end the rebellion, forcing the Soviet Union to fire a nuclear missile at Superman. In just a few panels, Frank Miller summarized the possible horrors of the Cold War for us. While Superman may not have been entirely in agreement with the act of invading another country to impose democracy and the American way of life, he certainly did act in this way, which puts him on the side of conservatism, a stance that puts him at odds with Batman, who in this comic leans more towards anarchism. But what do these terms mean? To explain it better, I will use something called the political compass, which is basically a map that shows you the position of political ideologies. On this map, the horizontal section measures the government's relationship with the economy. The left is an economy regulated and controlled by the state, while the right represents a free market. That is communism on this side, extreme capitalism on this other side. The vertical section represents how much control the government should have when imposing order. A government that is higher up on the map is not afraid to trample on a human right or two in order to maintain order and control. In other words, extreme conservatism. While if you position yourself lower on the map, you would believe that a government regulating people's behavior is not necessary. In other words, anarchism. Since the comic does not present Clark and Bruce's economic stance, we will handle the theory that they are in the center in this sense. The comic also implies that at some point in the story, they both worked together in the Justice League, but life was increasingly driving them apart ideologically. Superman, in the eagerness to continue helping people, became another tool of the United States government, a weapon with which President Ronald Reagan, who by the way does appear in the comic, can manipulate other countries. And it is precisely this degree of conservatives who are situated higher up on our map. They believe they have the right and even the obligation backed by God to spread and impose good customs and democracy throughout the world. In fact, there is a panel in the comic where the president literally tells the press, "The people of Corto Maltese want us there, don't worry. We have God on our side." Or, well, the closest thing, when the president asks Clark to tame Bruce as if he were a wild colt, he is trampling on Bruce's human rights, since he intends for Superman to physically assault him without giving Bruce the right to a fair trial, taking advantage of his status of power. This is another characteristic practice of extreme conservatism, the imposition of the law through the force of the government. In Bruce's case, the comic shows that he initially worked in some way allied with the Gotham City Police, or at least with Commissioner Jim Gordon. This tells us that initially Batman at least considered the government as a necessary evil to regulate laws. This dramatically changes in this comic, as over the years, he becomes increasingly disappointed with the inefficiency of institutions and moves closer to the lower part of the map where anarchism is located. Now, although many people use the term anarchist as a derogatory adjective to refer to a world without order or someone who simply does not follow the rules, anarchism is a valid ideological stance which does not aim for chaos, but quite the opposite. Anarchists believe that humans can regulate themselves, that we can respect our own rules without the help of police, governments, or other state agents, and that is exactly what Bruce Wayne does. As a society member without government or police approval, he takes it upon himself to recruit volunteers to maintain order. Anarchist acts like this in a conservative system certainly put Batman on the same level as a terrorist in the eyes of the government. All of this makes the blows in Batman's fight against Superman resonate with a deeply important and relevant political meaning for a world that was divided by politics and plunged into fear of the Third World War. But believe it or not, we have not yet gotten to the bottom of the matter, as this fight also represents the struggle between two sides of the same philosophical system that Frank Miller believed in, called Objectivism. Box 3. The Randian hero versus the Altruist. Objectivism is a philosophical system created by the writer Ayn Rand, who made it famous through her two most important novels, called The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. As a curious fact, Miller is not the only fan of objectivism related to DC Comics, as Zack Snyder has wanted to make a movie about the Fountainhead for quite some time. But in the end, this system proposes that we live in a fixed and objective reality that we can only understand by using our senses and using logic and reason. In other words, the world is as it is and not as we wish it to be, and we must make the most of the life we have. It turns out that Frank Miller has publicly stated that this philosophical system has greatly influenced his work, and he has even published acknowledgments to Rand. That's why Frank Miller's Batman has several qualities of what we call a Randian hero, that is, a person who embodies the greatest virtues according to Ayn Rand, which would be more or less like this. He is a person who achieves his goals regardless of obstacles and who never compromises his integrity, no matter if this causes conflict with other people. He is a man who has to follow his own ideals in order to be happy. A radical individualist whose greatest weapon is his superior intelligence and who is completely sure of his decisions because he made them based on reason and away from feelings. As we can see, all these qualities can be seen to a greater or lesser extent in Frank Miller's Batman. But there is one more quality that puts him particularly in conflict with Superman. It turns out that the Randian hero must be an atheist, as he cannot believe in the irrational existence of an all-powerful being who makes life easier for us and solves our problems. In fact, I think it's precisely because of this point that Frank Miller never liked the character of Superman, and it shows in his work. Superman, on the other hand, in addition to representing the figure of a messianic god, which objectivists suppose, represents another evil antagonist for the Randian hero. I'm referring to the egocentric altruist. Believe it or not, for Ayn Rand, altruistic people were evil, as she believed it was completely irrational to sacrifice oneself for the benefit of strangers, feeling that it is your duty. Now, maybe here one could say, wait a moment, Bruce Wayne also sacrifices himself for other people. However, the difference here lies in the conditions under which he did it. For Rand, an altruistic person is one who sacrifices a value in order to help complete strangers. In this case, Superman abandoned all value and even his own personal identity in order to continue helping complete strangers. He then became the personal messenger of the president, sacrificing his own morals and convictions. The case of Bruce Wayne was different, as he helps others by following his own rules and after deep reasoning. In a way, Bruce Wayne is not helping complete strangers, as for him Gotham City represents the legacy his family left, and it is completely rational for him to want to protect his family even if it means taking down the US government. As we can see, the fight between Batman and Superman from the comic The Dark Knight Returns turns out to be historic and revolutionary for many reasons. Not only is it the first real battle between the two titans of comics, but it is also a struggle of political ideals relevant to the world of that time, and a personal fight between Frank Miller's own heroes and demons. Like any good work of art, this story was a direct product of the society in which it was lived, combined with the writer's own psyche. Through a powerful and well-argued discourse that questioned the effectiveness of the government in dealing with the problems of society at that time, Miller demonstrated that comics also served as a medium for expressing complex and even transgressive ideas. For me, this comic represents the pinnacle of Batman stories, as we witness those rare occasions when the entire universe conspires in favor of art, miraculously bringing together a brilliant author, a relevant theme, a creative way of telling it, and above all, a world that needed this story just at that moment. If The Dark Knight Returns had been written today, it might not have had the same impact. Luck was on our side. Don't leave yet. If you like this video essay, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, where I take comics very seriously in every video. See the bibliography at the end of this video for more information. I am Go, the Geek Monitor, and see you later.